It always starts a little early.
It does. That's okay. I'm just gonna be a statue for a second.
It has to be live. We
Yes,
always
we are live. Welcome everybody to the first live sewing discourse, and with us today is the Grade Zero H.P. Lovecraft, amazing horrorist writer. Zero, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'd like to apologize to everyone for my no-show yesterday, but we've worked it out. So let's do this.
Let's do it indeed. Well, I wanted to get started just asking how you came about this extremely online sphere. What was it when you were growing up that drew you to Twitter eventually and to the kind of communities that you interact with?
Well, like many people my age, I think I grew up with the internet. I've been connecting to the internet since my very young life, and I used to frequent 4chan quite a bit, and eventually heat sort of died down there, and I made my way to Twitter really through the blogosphere. So there was a time, which I think a lot of us probably remember, maybe in the early 2010s, when blogs were just like the way to consume and communicate online culture. And slowly cannibalized that, because why say, in 1,000 words what you can say in 15? And the sort of heat of that medium just consumed everything else. So here I am.
I saw people recently talking about how the best way to write an essay is you write the essay, then you summarize it as a tweet, then you delete the essay. But that can't be entirely true. The benefits to long form that just you can never compare to like the microblog sphere of Twitter, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't write books, you would just tweet, I imagine.
Well, I think it sort of depends, because yes, I mean, if I write a tweet, within 24 hours, 50,000 people might see it, which is far more followers than I have, but that can easily happen, especially if it's inflammatory. 100,000 people could see it. Whereas if you write a book, you have to think most people probably fall off after one or two chapters, and really only a tiny minority make it all the way to the end. So if you're trying to reach quantity, then I think a tweet is a strictly superior medium. And a lot of the time, books are full of throat clearing. So if I'm writing for Twitter, then I use an economy of words because I have to. And the ideas get a bit simpler, they get a bit dumber, but they also become much more pointed. We waste a lot of time in essays using more words than we need to, using clumsy circumlocutions in our language. We use filler words, and there's signaling reasons for that. There's a lot of discipline that you have to use to communicate concisely, and Twitter forces you to do that. And people who cultivate that skill, I think, can still do it very, very well and maybe reach more people. But another trade-off is people aren't receptive to it. If I like it, you might retweet it. If you hate it, you might retweet it, you might comment, but it's very unlikely that you will change your mind in response to a maxim. Whereas in a book, you're approaching it not adversarially, but sort of cooperatively. So maybe reading all those extra words, it really just sort of, if you come into it humbly, then you're much more open to agreeing instead of just fighting and picking back at all the things that are said.
Hmm. Hmm. It's like there's a lot more etiquette in the longer form, like with when there's more words. It's similar to how if you tell someone, "Hey, could you please pass the salt when you get a chance?" versus pass the salt. Like one invades the mind a lot more offensively than the other, even though pragmatically they're both the same requests.
Definitely. And there's also a contract that if I put all the time into writing a book, then you know that I hopefully really gave it some thought, and these are like high quality ideas that I've hopefully refined and tested and worked on, whereas a tweet can be issued in a few seconds. So when you buy a book, or when you write a book, you're trying to send a signal like, this is careful, this is intelligent, this is nuanced. When you write a tweet, none of those signals are present.
By the way, I just want to let you guys know the frames have dropped to 69%. What I'm going to try to go, it should load up exactly in the same place, so the same people who are watching. Sorry for that interruption.
We are really working with the stick shift here.
Yes,
This
we
is a
are.
stick shift operation.
Well, like I was saying, eventually we're going to move this to a custom server. So it's going to be, it's going to have the best connection. And right now this is not the case, so we're dealing with the cards that we are given. I have no idea why it's been like this these past 2 days. I don't know what's going on. But either way, I want to make the best of it, and I really appreciate you coming here and talking with us today.
Awesome. Yeah, just on that note, someone in the chat has asked me to notice them, senpai. So.
And we've met throughout this whole time on Twitter. How many different communities are you noticing, and how many, let's say, overarching circles would you say there are that encompass a lot of these smaller communities within them? And I don't even know if it could be quantifiable like that, but I'm curious what you think.
Oh God. So there was a while back someone applied some kind of analysis to this, and it went a little bit viral. You may have seen it, where they sort of started with some seed accounts and traced all the mutuality lines, and they calculated distance using, I think, like number of mutuals in the cluster. And you can always set the dimensionality in these kinds of things, or not the dimensionality. Sorry, you can set the number of categories you want. You can say, give me 5 categories, give me 3, give me 1, give me many. And depending how you break it down, I mean, in a sense, every single person is their own community. But in another sense, I think that there are, any given time, 3 or 4 highly dynamic factions of people that I interact with, and they all bleed into each other. There's no, there's no hard boundaries, and how people choose to identify from one day to the next may well shift.
I get a feeling that the thought leaders in the different communities that I'm noticing would be, let's say, Bronze Age pervert in the community of people who want to physically better themselves while at the same time having particular views on what happened in the past. And then you would have Kantbot's community, who's kind of like having a bit of a tuffle with that community right now. And then you would have esoteric Twitter, which also bleeds into the Bronze Age pervert community. But what a lot of these have in common is that they don't seem to be associating, at least how I'm able to see, that much with the Twitter communities who are more on the left, unless you've noticed that this has changed in the past couple of months. Like, are people already getting tired of bickering together?
I wish I could see a graph of or like a infographic of those different spheres that you're talking about, because I thought it's all hyper left wing as well. I feel like a lot of these people kind of avoid labels and pigeonholes. I feel like that's part of the identity of the Twitter sphere. Although, as like, maybe I'm just too much of an outsider, or just like not.
I think the closer you are to it, the more resolution you have on it. I could probably find a graph for you in a little bit that might be illuminating. But as far as like left and right goes, in a sense, what do these terms mean? I have my own personal ideas of what they mean, but of course everyone will quibble, everyone likes to fight about these things. I don't think people are ever going to get tired of fighting about them, by the way. That's never going to happen. In my personal conception of left and right, I used to lean very heavily on Brian Kaplan's definition, which is that a leftist is a person who cannot stand markets, and a rightist is a person who cannot stand leftists. This comes close to capturing the dynamic, but it's still not quite right. Lately, I've been favoring the idea that maybe Rousseau is a perfect fault line. So in the Rousseauian conception, is this very famous quote, which is that man is born free and is everywhere in chains. And if you agree with that, if you think that there's a sort of pristine purity and that, society makes people bad, that culture makes people bad, and that they should be good, then that's a left-wing position. That's the heart of the left. If you think private property is the source of all inequality and that's a bad thing, then you're a leftist. And that's really it's that last clause. And that's a bad thing. Then that's leftism. But if you think, no, that's fine, in fact, property is the sort of fundament of civilization, in fact, that the idea that we respect each other's ability to own things, and we say, not everyone's going to have the exact same material means in the same proportion, that's rightism. If you're comfortable with that, then you're a rightist. This is my latest thinking on the subject.
I've started thinking in different terms. In terms of upwingers and downwingers, and how I would define that are downwingers have more faith in top-down processes, and upwingers have more faith in the nature of emergence and bottom-up systems.
So this is maybe one of the two axes of your kind of classic political compass. Like, I think that maps pretty cleanly onto authoritarian versus libertarian, if you like. I have a lot of problems with that compass, but broadly, I think that's sort of the axis that you're capturing.
So is one of your biggest inspirations H.P. Lovecraft, or is it an old name that you've stuck with, but you have like many equally revered inspirations or muses or role models, or however you would?
I would say I have several principal influences. Lovecraft is not the biggest, but I do have a strong affinity for him. In particular, I think that he is one of the few authors in recent memory who was able to truly create new myths and new worlds. Like, he didn't just create his stories, and his actual body of work is not very big, but the thing where you can just reconcile the difference, not something where you can, find some mediation or find some compromise. You can't compromise with the outside. That's another sort of leftism versus rightism situation. I think the chat might have died.
No, we got it right back again. I just have to keep switching these servers, so now it's a little bit better than before. Again, my apologies for this weird situation. In the future streams, we're going to definitely correct this by getting a custom server. But now everything should be online.
Cool. Yeah. So, but yeah, Lovecraft's, like, his orientation towards the world is that there is a hideous, unknowable, truly alien other. And I very much identify with that.
So it's kind of like in the Marvel universe, you had Doctor Strange. When they were opening a portal in that film, it seemed like a Lovecraftian portal where, like, malicious beings, like horrifying beings, were like people were flirting with, just opening up this Pandora's box in a way that is totally avoidable, right?
I have to confess, I know very little about the Marvel universe, but I will take your word for it.
It's different than you've got Artemis Fowl. Recently Lev and I have been bouncing around with portal stories that are in popular culture. I started thinking about some of these things because wormholes are supposed to be possible on paper, according to theoretical physicists. You have Eric Weinstein's show called The Portal, and I could have sworn I heard him talking, and because of the polite society he's in and how allergic people are to making leaps in speculation, especially when like having credibility and cherishing your credibility are two things that are so hard to get and hold on to. It seems like there are people who think we have certain capabilities that aren't just on paper.
Definitely.
And if you have so it's interesting to then, just from a creative standpoint, to then look at different stories where people have these portals in the stories, because a lot of times, even if you're just looking at sci-fi, a lot of artists would describe environments or describe scenarios or do thought experiments without any information, and they would somehow predict or accurately describe things in the future, like Jules Verne, for example. And so Lovecraft to me is very interesting. I haven't read his work actually, but I'm familiar with it from anecdotes, and just he's just so referenced all the
I
time.
started reading, by the way, I started reading Into the Mouth of Madness, and that's partly because of my fascination with Antarctica and what goes on there. And there is that idea, I think, that fear. I don't remember who it was who originally coined that term, but the idea that there is like this collective intelligence.
I think
Lovecraft. Yeah?
Noosphere was coined by Jardin,
Oh, yeah,
uh,
Jordan.
but probably popularized by McLuhan.
So I think
Yeah.
that there are
So
people
Mountains
out
of
there who can.
Madness, fantastic. Mountains of Madness, by the way, a fantastic work. I highly recommend it.
Yes.
Did you get how far did you get?
It's just in the very beginning when they're on their adventure. So they did not go deep inside yet or see the ruins or anything like that. So I'm still very far off from where I need to be. But I am fascinated by that idea, though, having to do with Admiral Byrd's adventures and that whole idea of the Nazis secretly occupying Antarctica right now and meeting the people who live in the inner Earth. It's all very romantic and fascinating for me to. I know Jules is cringing out right now, but it is
It's not
something that's.
cringing.
It's still something that's on people's minds today, I think, especially from like a lot of the right-wing Twitter sphere. They seem very interested in this idea, and I am partly interested in it too. If we imagine like we are on the outside and there's another inner world that's very different from ours, where people can live a lot longer, where there's a central sun. So it's in a way like the world that
Oh,
we're
you mean
inhabiting.
the idea of a hollow Earth?
Yes, exactly.
There's no way there would be an inner sun. There's that description. If you wanted to really speculate and I just think it no, no, maybe I don't even want to go there.
So
I don't even
I
go
love
there.
the idea of these kind of alternate geologies or cosmologies. They're fun to think about, and it's important to entertain these, even if you don't take them seriously. That is to say, if you believe the Earth is hollow and so on, how is that going to actually change your behavior on a day-to-day basis? Well, you might start trying to dig a tunnel into the hollow Earth, and I think that would be excellent. I would love it if you did that, but most likely you're just going to fail unless you buy a lot of specialized equipment, and then you're going to fail in a different, more interesting way. So, like, it's really good to entertain these kinds of outside ideas. But I actually wanted to go back a little bit because you mentioned Weinstein, and you mentioned his idea or his show being called The Portal. So I think Weinstein is a true Straussian, and he doesn't, whatever it is that he believes privately, I think he holds it very close to his chest. And the face that he puts on publicly is meant to allude to those things. And the reason he calls it the portal, I believe, is because he's hoping to transport people to that sort of hidden Straussian truth. Um, yes. On the topic, someone in the chat asked, didn't the Russians dig really deep into the earth? I don't know, but you should read a creepypasta called The Russian Sleep Experiment and see if your answers are there.
There is a hole that I remember there. By the way, this stream keeps going offline. I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to try to lower the bitrate. I've never done that before, but hopefully that's going to help. Let's see. So if I end stream, if I open settings, let's see.
Is the recording interrupted currently?
Well, the recording keeps going on and off, so people are hearing us talk right now, but I just want to make sure that people keep hearing us talk, because the video itself seems really good quality. Because I think that there may be another way to do this, so going live, output, bitrate, okay, I see where it is. So, what I've learned so far is that when we're doing these live streams, if it's not on the screen for a certain amount of time, then it's just going to automatically create. Here we go, it's starting.
Are we back?
We should be back pretty soon. Let's see, it says 48, so I have lowered the bitrate by about half, and hopefully that's going to, there we go. Okay.
A lot of this is Chinese to me.
Yes. Okay, the bitrate is officially lowered, so hopefully everything should be good from now on. So yeah.
Are you familiar with there was a cartoon called SWAT Cats? And
yes, I do remember that.
And it's actually an amazing cartoon. I started rewatching some of them for meme research and just looking for motifs. And they have a lot of Portal motifs in that cartoon. And I was wondering, because they pulled it off the air, like that cartoon is so ahead of its time. Like when you're watching, they're talking about like RoboCop type stuff, pandemic type stuff, government type stuff. It's a really sophisticated cartoon. And they said they pulled it off the air because it was too violent and they didn't want it to be promoting violence to kids. But there's also a part of me that just wondered if it just wasn't Teletubbies enough or something. Like if there was just something about the cartoon that just like didn't fit the flavor of the week that a lot of the like leading broadcasters were really going for. So they just decided to retire it and pull it off the air. And now they've like made it sound like this like rebel hardcore cartoon. If you look at the stuff they put on Toonami and you look at this anime stuff, there's just it is so campy. It's like old school
At
Batman.
the risk of sounding like certain other Twitter personas, they pulled it off the air because it was an accurate historical documentary and an alchemical allegory for the rise of the furry fetish among the internet community. So it was too close to the truth. It had to go because it was telling a lot of people what really went on. I can't really say I remember it though.
Well, furries is a very interesting subculture. I remember growing up, I was a big Sonic the Hedgehog aficionado, and I remember seeing Princess Sally.
No longer, I hope.
No, no longer. But here's the thing, though. I still can appreciate the design. So I can appreciate the design, the way that they were able to put certain sexual elements in these characters, and what that did for whole generations. But the thing about the furries that weirds me out, though, is that their suits don't look like the characters that they draw. It's like mascot clothing, you know. It looks all. It does not. It's not anatomically correct. You know, it's not.
Well, Sonic is an accelerationist, and I think they get as close as they can. But the interesting, or maybe the revolting thing about furries is that fetishes tend to cluster. So a lot of the time, when people have one fetish, they have several, and that is multiple versions are highly comorbid. So it's not just that these people who are thus afflicted have this kind of strange anthropomorphic bestiality fetish. It's that they attach a lot of other things that are much more horrific. And if you've spent any time on 4chan, then you will certainly be aware of these dimensions of perversity.
Well, there is that story of Kiro the Wolf and the Zoo Crew that I remember Mr. Metokur was talking about.
Was that the fellow who cut off his own hands, or froze off his own hands so that he could get paws? That one
No,
went
no,
around
but
a bit.
it's pretty much at a similar kind of level. But I don't know, like for most people, whatever they want to draw or whatever they want to do in the conventions, as long as it's consenting adults, and that's fine with me. But although I guess that is kind of something people like saying today, like, whatever you do in the privacy of your own home, that's fine with me. But there is still a thought of what is happening to this three-dimensional civilization we're in. If people aren't getting attached to the traditions of the past and are being attached to these newfound fetishes, is it going to change society? And I think it has changed society to some extent, from being more communal to more inwards.
It's ultimately, I think, and no offense to you, a bit of a cop out to say whatever people want to do is fine. The fact is, it's not fine, but it's very socially safe to say that it's fine, to say live let live. That's always going to be a position where everyone goes, well, okay, you are not a threat. But I don't think it's fine at all. I
Why not?
think that there's no way to keep these things sort of wrapped up and in the privacy of whatever consensual place they supposedly live. If and many fetishes, by their very nature, cannot be enclosed like that because there are dimensions of exhibitionism, and there are dimensions of identity where people don't just want to, play act their sexual fascination in private with one person. They want it to be a lifestyle. They want it to be a role that is seen and it's visible. And so you can never say, oh, this is fine in private, this strange perversion, because there's no fence. There's no clear border there. And so it'll always be, well, why is it if it's okay between me and my friend in private, why can't we just be open and out and proud about it? So there is no steady state in tolerance. There is only sort of erasure or celebration. And I don't like that I have to make that assertion, but I base it more on observation than on deduction. There is everything that was supposedly going to be fine when done in private between consenting adults is now televised for everyone to see and broadcast on the New York Times. It's not possible to contain these things. Either you let them out all the way or you keep them closed away.
Well, to me, when I think about the American tradition and the intention of state rights, it's so that so people can vote with their feet as well. And I feel like more and more there's this trend towards wanting the state to arbitrate more and more and more, and to be more and more of a nanny figure. And it reminds me of the difference between, like playground code, how you would have certain children would depend on their parents or the teachers to arbitrate their disputes, or to like go to bat for them. And then you would just have kids that just dealt with everything on their own. And if they went to their parents for help, they would laugh at them and just be like, well, that sucks for you. Like, you're on your own, right? So I think that when you think about certain things, like, it's hard for me to wrap my head around certain things not being fine in public, or not being fine in private, rather. But I really think that we are all better codifiers. I say this all the time, but I think we're better codifiers of each other's behavior. Like, I think just because something should be legal doesn't mean it should be socially acceptable, right? So you can have a weird fetish that's not illegal, but if you're not discreet, or you don't show tact, or you're socially inept, like that, that's going to negatively affect you, as it should. So that's not really.
That the state has no business regulating, right? And that's true. That's a good thing to understand. It's actually not as it's a relatively novel position. I mean, there was a time, right, when it was very, very hard to distinguish between moral law and state law. The idea that these two things could be in opposition, I think, is kind of an enlightenment idea, and I don't think it's wrong. Like, definitely people can be aware that there's a moral law that diverges from state law. There should be. I mean, even in a sense, like, you can find currents of this idea going back very, very far indeed. But just because a behavior isn't, like you say, a behavior can be stigmatized without being illegal, but you still have to take proper care to enforce those boundaries. Because if it's, say something is not illegal, but it's in poor taste, well, can you still show it on television? Can you still write a book about it? Can you still make a podcast about it? And if the answer to all those questions is yes, then what you're going to end up with is normalizing things that perhaps should not be normal, because we all serve as mimetic role models for each other. And when you see someone doing something, when you see someone wanting something, especially, when you see other people expressing a desire, you can't help it. You feel a gravity, and you internalize some of the desires that you see displayed. So if you say, all right, this shouldn't be illegal, but it's bad, it's tasteless, it's wrong, just the state shouldn't regulate it, you have to go a little bit further, and you have to prevent the desire for that bad thing from leaking out into the public square. So I agree with you, but I don't think it's quite that simple either.
I'm very sympathetic to arguments that say if you don't like the radio program, don't listen to it. If you don't like the television show or the station, don't watch it. Just because we live freedom of information, like with freedom of speech, it's hard for me to reconcile the intent of the First and Second Amendment. Even just stick with the first.
But you're not really free though to turn it off. Like, just because I don't like a particular book or television show, and I can tune out, it doesn't mean I can actually tune it out if I want to engage with all the people around me. If everyone I know is talking about The Office, then whether or not I want to know about The Office, I have to. I have no choice.
You have to make a choice.
Because, I mean, I can go live in a cabin, and perhaps I should do that. Maybe a concrete bunker with a lot of guns and many years' supply of food. That's a right-wing impulse, and I feel that. I think if you don't feel that, then maybe you aren't looking around too much. But if you want to engage with other people around you, then you can't live as an island, you know. All the memes that are around you, they infect you too.
Well, that's why we have these online communities as well, where the people who aren't big fans of the popular culture, they have other people that they could resonate with. But still, in the three-dimensional world, it is kind of a problem where you wouldn't necessarily, like, I'm not a big fan of a lot of elements of popular culture. I go to the National Arts Club, you know, they have a lot of interesting events there. But it would still be nice, sometimes I imagine, like, if I was, let's say, a French tradcath, and I've seen some French tradcaths posting images on Twitter of, like, this French gentleman with a fancy mustache and a top hat going around with his lady, you know, arm in arm, you know, across Paris, and this is, like, a very beautiful painting. So they imagine, what if life was like this? What if everybody was beautifully dressed, everybody talked a certain way, everybody, you know, had these mannerisms, and life was just this very interesting looking spectacle. But at the same time, there was a lot of horrible things that happened back then too. You know, it's like I can't imagine turning back the clock now, not just with the creature comforts that we have, but also, you know, with medicine, you know, with all these other things. Like, even if we were to, let's say, have some kind of dictator come in and institute these things, my fear is that the cure would be worse than the disease in that case, because that power is going to corrupt him, and there's going to be all kinds of things that'll make you wish you were living in this degenerate hellhole of current year, by comparison.
Well, so you can't impose culture that way, is, I think, the issue. But you very much could impose a new culture on people. And the way that you would do it would be actually by, and it would take decades, by systematically suppressing certain perspectives in media by controlling news broadcasts, by controlling movies, by controlling what discourse is allowed. It's not fast, and in fact, what has to happen mostly is people have to be brought up for a couple of generations in a media environment that you saturate. But I would argue that this is precisely what has happened, because there's been a colossal shift in our manners and in our norms in the past 20 years. And it's mostly, so there's no central conspiracy, right? There's no one person or group of people in a shadowy room pressing the buttons going, ha ha ha. But what there are is there's incentive gradients. That is, there's a kind of a process that anyone who makes media can participate in. There are gatekeepers to taste, and there are things that there are certain vectors that you push along, and if you do that, you will be rewarded. It's not entirely a random walk. So it would be possible, like not all at once, but piecemeal, to go maybe not back, but to something that simulates an older culture. But it would take a long time, and it would take kind of a stranglehold on media.
I think the desire for an older culture is potentially like a misinterpretation of what's even desired. And I think about Karl Popper's proposal of what knowledge is, theories and refutations, or conjectures and refutations. He says all knowledge is plainly theory, and it's based on conjectures and refutations. And the theories we provisionally accept are the ones that withstand the most rigorous criticism. And so an old culture that survives would be one that withstood the most rigorous criticism. So what people really want, I believe, is truth. They want stability, right? They don't want to stranglehold. No, everyone.
Well, you see, that's
everyone
kind of the
can,
problem, though, because we've always had an elite, and if we have a responsible elite that could dictate culture, then I think the rest of the people would follow suit.
Your desire is the same, right? But if you listen to yourself when you say, "Oh, I look at this old painting of this traditional couple, and I wish, wouldn't it be nice if everyone was like that?" And you have the same impulse, you have the same instinct for social engineering society as the people that I think you have more distaste for. And I do think that
piecemeal social engineering.
You don't want to be you don't want to be a Debbie Downer either. And I think a lot of people do themselves a disservice sometimes by accident because, I'm not the biggest fan of The Office. I can watch The Office and enjoy it. I genuinely believe the more things you enjoy, the more enjoyable your life is. So I try to do things to make my life maximally enjoyable. Like if I find something I don't like, and if I can't just call it a thought experiment, but it's not even that because it's more authentic than that. If I can't find a way to find a silver lining or to look at a blade of grass in a way that's more with awe than it is just as like a mundane cynicism, then I'm hurting myself. I'm hurting my internal experience. And frankly, I think that would make meeting Anubis more difficult, right? I think it actually makes you more prone to fear and things like that, and not the useful kind of fear that a solo rock climber uses to free solo a wall, right? Because they've interviewed these free solo climbers. They're like, how do you do that without being scared, without feeling fear? And they're like, no. I feel fear the entire time. That's what I'm using to guide me.
Isn't this a very decadent perspective, though? Because you talk about the fear of a mountain climber, but what about an existential fear? What about a fear of, genuine danger from, not danger that you choose, like in an extreme sport, but danger that's imposed upon you because the world around you is genuinely hostile? Now, right now, we live in a world where mostly, at least you and I, don't face these types of existential dangers. But it's really not as far away as it might seem. So social engineering is going to happen whether you're driving it or someone's going to drive it, right?
Exactly.
The world will always be ruled by an organized minority of people. And there's just no way around that. And they're going to impose their tastes and their direction on society. So someone has to drive. Who will it be? That's kind of the first point. And the second point is that if you only sort of, like, you can try to attend to your mental state in this decadent culture, no existential risk, all you like, but isn't that neglecting hard realities? Isn't that sort of overlooking all of the cliffs? Like, you can't just say, oh, there's no cliff there. If I keep walking, I'm not going to fall off of it. Because there are cliffs, and you will.
Sure. To me, I've always been more afraid of like a boy who cries wolf scenario. Or there was one video that like really traumatized me, and there's this family crossing like a river or like a stream, and a flash flood is coming, and you have all these people going like, oh, there's a flash flood, like get out of the way. And this other family was like so into their comfort zone and like so resented people telling them what to do or to like move fast that they were like, like we're just gonna like quick like take our time walking past this stream. And then people were like, you guys gotta move, there's a flash flood coming. And then too bad, like they all got stuck. Like the flash flood came, it started rising, they're all stuck on this rock, and then it wiped them off a cliff and they all died, right? And so I think that is a very dangerous environment. It's a very dangerous environment when you have a kind of isolated low trust society, and then people come very bad at identifying existential threats that are slowly incoming, that are easily avoidable, and that people are just have been conditioned to be incapable of cooperating to avoid
so how do you get to a high
problems.
trust society? Like you say, a problem is that we're in a low trust society, but how do you get to a high trust society?
I think memetically is how you do it. I think that there are some uncomfortable truths that people haven't been disseminated broadly enough. As in,
If I can get those uncomfortable truths.
sure, I'll think some ideas I think are very similar to. You could think very similarly to equalizers, things that are equalizers, just like the Second Amendment. Like I think a firearm is an equalizer in terms of if you're a 70-year-old grandfather, the only thing that you could use if three 20-year-olds with baseball bats break into your home is a firearm, right? Even if they have firearms, like at least you could turtle up, you've got a firearm, it's an equalizer. I think there are certain, like there's like Machiavelli's The Prince, right? Which is a book Machiavelli wrote as a gift, and people were so horrified by his frankness that they threw him in a prison, or they threw him in a dungeon, right? And I think that is the kind of book where if everyone read, it would be an equalizer. Like, I think if everyone was aware of evolutionary psychology with its flaws and shortcomings and fallibility, it would be an equalizer. I think when you have Nassim Taleb...
Like, I mean, some people are really stupid, like, objectively, and some are really smart. So they could all sort of hear the same truth. And it won't necessarily resound with them the same way. They won't be able to draw the same conclusions, take the same actions.
Certainly. I think there's another issue that people have, and I think there's a slow solution coming, emerging in culture, and it has to do with maintaining youth and old age, right? Like this kind of which is kind of antagonistic to a Jesus perspective of, I'm going to do away with childish things as I get older. Like there's also the perspective of don't grow up, it's a trap. As in, I think some people are sort of stuck in this Victorian Puritan perspective almost, that becoming older has a lot to do with not experiencing the highs and lows of your emotional range. And that the most desirable progression for an adult is to kind of go through a lithium of age where you're kind of in this stable middle ground so that you're very predictable and so that people around you think you're predictable, as opposed to someone like Kanye West or Elon Musk or, huh?
What do you think we should do with unpredictable people? Or
I think we want more unpredictable people, because I actually think everyone is unpredictable. I think everyone is unpredictable. I think everyone is unpredictable. And I think anyone you see that you think is predictable, like, you have lied to yourself, because everyone is unpredictable.
Markets could function if everyone were unpredictable.
I do, because I think there's order in chaos. So like when I'm sorry, but what when I read Chaos, The Making of a New Science by James Gleick, which is about chaos theory or complexity theory. It's about how randomness is not exactly random. So there's something called the Mandelbrot set, which is the graph of randomness, as in they came up with a series of experiments that would produce random results. And then they used a supercomputer, to graph these random results. And they got this.
I am familiar with fractal equations. I've written
so the Mandelbrot set is the graph of randomness. And what it shows is that randomness is not exactly random, right? So that even though it's completely unpredictable, it actually follows predictable patterns. For example, if I plant an oak tree, I would never in a million years be able to predict with a drawing what that oak tree is going to look like. But I know it's not going to look like a strawberry, right? So even though the growth of the oak tree is unpredictable, I can predict with arguably 100% certainty it's not going to look like a strawberry I can fit in my pocket and like take a bite out of. So
Jules, the guy with the Russian curse word as his username says Mandelbrot set is not a graph of randomness, but it's built by a principle.
I think that's a great way to put it. As
I recall, it's a graph of an attractor. If we look at it, we can find a pretty simple equation for it on the internet. They're like it's quite regular. But talking about emergent, conditions in situations where a small generative set can have a large complex outcome. I think that's fairly well established, and it's interesting to understand. But the kind of randomness you're talking about, it has topography, right? So it's not actually unpredictable at all. It's just it exists kind of like in a thermodynamic system where there's probabilities, and you can say a certain number of particles will land here, and others will land there, and they'll be in some probability cone. So that's quite predictable, actually, and it's necessary to be able to predict the future in order to function in time, right? In order to do something as simple as project what your inventory will look like for your business 6 months down the line. So I think we've deviated pretty far from maybe the core topics that we were hoping to discuss.
I could actually bring it back, I think, regarding human beings and randomness. We take a look at different voting districts, and we see many who are voting red and many who are voting blue. If it was completely random, we would have a purple color, I guess. I don't know. We would just have a whole mix everywhere. So people rally around certain things. Absolutely.
See, this is one of my frustrations with chaos theory not being taught in schools along with biology and physics and chemistry, is because you have to condense the deepest implications of it in a way that people don't even know how to apply it to open and closed systems. Right? As in the way chaos theory applies to an open system is fundamentally different to how it applies to closed systems. And that's because of strange attractors, right? But the reason why, if you had perfect information, if you had perfect information, according to chaos theory, which could be wrong, you would never be able to predict the weather more than 2 weeks in advance, right? Like you could have sensors like atoms apart, like all over the earth, like in like far out into the universe, and they could be in perfect sync, in perfect communication, and they would not be able to predict the weather, right, more than 2 weeks in advance with perfect information, and that's because of chaos. So what it deals with is some people have a theory of the universe as a mechanical clock, right? It's a mechanical clock system, right? So if you had perfect information, you'd be able to predict the future like the psychohistorians in the Foundation. But it's wrong because the universe is not a clock. Or better yet, if you think of the universe like a clock, the clock is wound by chaos. And this is the nature of emergence, right? So I, as someone that has faith in human beings and mankind and
not exactly.
markets,
Well,
I want to
not exactly.
facilitate an environment for emergence.
Zero, you were saying.
I, I, I don't have much faith. Much faith in human beings. Emergence, I think, is also emergence. I think a little bit from the sort of idea of emergence that of sort of many parts, and that at different levels of abstraction, there may be properties of system that exist at a higher level that are not present at a low level. And a really classic example is heat, because at a low level, if you look at, say, a collection of atoms, it's really quite ridiculous to say any one atom is hot or cold. This doesn't mean anything. And I understand, look, the problems with the classical model of physics, okay, sure. But look, on some level, all the particles in, say, my cup of coffee are moving either quickly or slowly, but no individual particle is hot or cold. But collectively, the body of the particles is hot or cold. Temperature is an emergent property of matter. That's what emergence really is. It means that there are properties at higher levels that are not present at lower levels. So I think it's a little bit muddied to talk about emergence in this kind of progressive type of framework. To say, like, yes, of course, complex things emerge out of system people's interaction. You could say a market is a good example of emergence. Certainly no one person is a market, but many people trying to produce things and fulfill each other's demands, that is a market. That's another example of emergence at a higher level.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Well,
I really recommend, by the way, reading a book by, I've forgotten his name. One moment. Let me look it up.
What's the title of the book? Well, let me take this chance to tell everybody who's watching this, please subscribe. Look at the amazing people we have on today. Once again, Zero, thank you so much for coming on. And yesterday we had a fantastic stream with Logo Daedalus, with Zero HP Lovecraft in the chat. Delicious Tacos was joining us, and we also had Kristen J. Jacobson, who is a professor of women's studies. So that was a very interesting combination, and I think everybody had a really good time. So this is the kind of stuff we love doing, but we need money. We need your support. So go to patreon.com/11joules and become a patron, and we're going to be doing a lot more of this stuff, bring people together. I want to get people in here from the New Yorker. I want to get people in here from a lot of these different intelligentsia circles together with people like Zero HP Lovecraft, because I think that there has been a very big divide for a long time, and I would be very interested to see what happens when we merge that divide. I have no idea, but it seems like fun to me.
Yeah, so the book I was going to recommend, if you want to read more about emergence and simulation, is a book by Manuel de Landa, and it's called Philosophy and Simulation. Really, really good book about emergence, and it gives a kind of account of the world starting at the lowest levels of reality that we're able to see, and the emergence of life all the way up into more complicated levels by means of the virtual. So that's a really interesting book to read. I recommend Manuel de Landa in general, if you're interested in philosophy of Deleuze especially. I think that de Landa illuminates a lot of the jargon in Deleuze that's maybe very hard to understand.
Cool.
Well, there's a progression that I've noticed, at least in terms of looking at artwork and looking at the written word. If you compare something like the Iliad to even the Odyssey, there seems to be a progression over time of the ego, where you would have archaic Greek artwork where the Greeks would be depicted as like puppets, and they say themselves that they are controlled by the will of the gods, and now we see ourselves as these independent human beings. So I'm curious what your take is on that, as far as how independent are we from other forces that may influence us?
The answer is not very. I am particularly keen on the Nietzschean formulation that a thought comes not when I want, but when it wants. So I sort of see the process of cognition as more, the phenomenological experience of cognition happens after, in my opinion, the actual function of cognition. You have thoughts and you passively experience them. You don't really drive them, in my opinion.
Oh, and by the way, we have one more person joining us right now. So the only problem is that her audio, this is Leonella, and I'm going to be bringing her on soon. The only problem is that her audio right now sounds like we're going through a windstorm. So I'm not sure exactly, Leonella, what's going on there, but you're going to be on the screen soon. But see if there's any way to correct that audio issue, because I don't know about the chat, but I'm definitely hearing that gust of wind going on in the background.
It's peace. It sounds a little peaceful to me. Like I could imagine going to sleep to that kind of that air sound that you know.
Well, let me
like outside a therapist's office.
Yeah.
You know, when you hear the sound like.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad sound. There are a lot worse sounds out there, definitely. But have you heard, by the way, have you heard of this book by, see, now I can't remember the name either. It talked about the bicameral mind during the Bronze Age, where
Yes,
it was Julian James.
James.
Yeah. So that kind of goes to what I was saying before, and it really fascinates me, this idea. I guess it's kind of like a Gnostic idea, too, that there are these archons, these certain principles that and like right now that I'm speaking to you, it's not actually me. There is no me in that sense. There is just only these various influences that kind of like compete for attention. But I guess the ego is whatever property gets to decide yes or no, which goes to the question of morality and the choices that we make not to denigrate ourselves down to the level of animals. So I think that would be kind of like a right-leaning position too, right? Where there's this idea of a fallen state where if we're not careful, we can fall further and further down, and it'll be a lot harder to rise back up again without having good influence.
So I think all psychoanalytical or psychological theories of the mind they're very fumbling. It's very, very hard to know from inside this experience how it works from the outside. And this is actually one of my fascinations with the idea of interior versus exterior. Because when you make a model of yourself as like a whole bunch of different impulses, whether you give it like a Freudian treatment or a Jungian treatment or whatever else, I mean, ultimately you're really just telling yourself a story. It may be a useful story, but it's not like you could dissect a brain and point to, like, here's the ego cells, here's the id cells, right? It's a model. Maybe it's a useful model, but I personally don't find it useful to compartmentalize myself in these types of ways. Though I do split myself between an online persona and a public persona.
Yeah, I used to compartmentalize a lot more, and then I completely dissolved all of that away through conversation, self-therapy, self-expression, and also just the fascination with the mind that I read a lot about. Um, I think that even though you can't pinpoint certain things in the brain, I think learning about dynamics has helped me think of the brain as a microcosm or macrocosm for a lot of other similar systems. So, like the brain is very similar to the weather in a lot of ways. The brain is very similar to the universe in a lot of ways. And so you can't pinpoint positions in the weather, right? If you think about the universe not as a static thing, but as something that's constantly churning, right? You start to realize how things are interacting with each other in a dynamic system. And if you subscribe to integrated information theory, which is a panpsychism theory, like a Hindu Buddhist theory about how consciousness emerges, how all matter is conscious, but depending on how integrated, like aspects of matter are, like you start witnessing tiers of consciousness.
Talking about integrated information theory.
Yes. Yeah, integrated information theory. And then
it's a pretty interesting paper, but again, I mean, it's very much in its infancy. Even the authors of the paper sort of admit, they're like, we don't really know empirically how to cash this out. And I think that's important to understand. Like, it's a nice idea. I personally am content to just call qualia an incomprehensible mystery, and I'm pretty happy. I satisfied my own curiosity in that regard. I understand how a neural network works. I understand how to build a brain out of bits on a rudimentary level, obviously. Like, I mean, I could train a neural network to do things. But I don't feel that there's any framework that we have to bridge the gap between that sort of understanding and qualitative experience. So I hope it'd be nice if someday some genius of consciousness comes along and really has that idea. But for me personally, I don't think that we have it. And if I don't think it's possible at this time. If it ever is possible, it's going to be possible because some technology will enable us to have new perceptions that are not actually possible right now. That is, inventing telescopes allowed us to see and learn things about the stars, and inventing microscopes allowed us to learn things about all kinds of, tiny animalculae and so on. And in order to learn some kind of new scope that's going to have to be invented that hasn't been yet.
I think we'll learn more about consciousness through cart before the horse advancements, even. That by making other things that mimic or seem to have consciousness, and by reverse engineering certain other things, like, we'll start to learn about it. So I think it's more likely that we would create consciousness before having a deeply satisfying understanding of what it is. And if you really get down to the nitty gritty and granular of what understanding is, you never understand, right? Because you're always operating with incomplete information, like ad infinity, right? So there's always more to understand. Like, you're always gonna be working with. There's not gonna be like this aha cherry on the top moment of like, oh, we understand that thing now.
By the way,
right?
Jules,
You're always
we have
working
a comment.
with.
We have a comment from the Russian curse word guy. HP, do you buy the hard problem of consciousness?
Yes, and I answered in the chat, but I will answer out loud. I will say that I do, in the sense that I can come up with no bridge between qualitative experience and what I understand about computation, which is a fair bit. Certainly there are people who know more. But I also think that an eliminativist approach is the only one that we have. And so there's an awful lot of things that could be dealt with through an eliminativist approach, far more than probably many people naively suspect.
What is the eliminativist approach, for those who don't know?
So what this means is, for example, you might think, we can build a machine that can think in the sense of can see. So just being able to see is a kind of cognition. The fact that we can build a camera and then hook it up to a neural network and it can identify objects with some training, this is a form of cognition. This is something that your brain is doing and your eyes are doing, and it's doing in a pretty mechanistic way. And it's pretty well understood how light sort of propagates through the lens in your eye and it hits certain photoreceptors and even goes into certain parts of the brain. And there's even brain imaging experiments that can be done that can retrieve sort of some of the neural correlates of what you are seeing. So
but the question is, who's the viewer?
No, there cannot possibly be a viewer. It doesn't make sense, because if you posit a viewer, then you have an infinite regression problem. The only way that there can be a viewer is the brain is just some kind of an Ansible or a transponder for a soul on a different metaphysical plane.
Exactly.
This is impossible to rule out, but it's also not a very fruitful way to start thinking until you have built something that can do every materially absorption of the brain. You cannot begin to consider that possibility.
And by the way, we have one more question from Mr. Dupe, and then I want to introduce Leonella, who's been patiently waiting here. Leonella, I hope you can hear us. So the question is, Zero, this is from Mr. Dupe. Zero, do you believe in a higher order sentient consciousness comprised of humans acting as the neurons in a sense?
I believe that groups of people can act in ways that exhibits a problem-solving intelligence. I do not believe that is to say, I find very dubious that such a group of people could have its own interior phenomenological experience. If you take a sort of panpsychist approach, then yes, that would have to be possible. But this is absurdity. Like, it's much like the idea of brain as transponder. It's something you can really only start to consider once you have fully mapped out the mechanical function of the brain.
Yeah, you have to reject Occam's razor for peace of mind, right? So just because something's possible, like a lot of people believe things because they want to, not because they're using like strong epistemology. And those, I think it's very important not to shut those people out and to make sure those people are just as loud as the people that stingently use Occam's razor. But I think that if you're rolling dice according to Occam's razor as opposed to rolling dice according not to Occam's razor, I think one's going to give you better outcomes than the other. That's a terrible analogy. I just made it up on the fly, but I just wanted to say one thing about qualia.
Oh, go ahead.
I haven't. But as far as qualia goes, we're starting to be able to like really look into the brain. I really agree with Tesla when he said like we're going to create machines that will be able to like project dreams you're experiencing like one-to-one eventually. I think it's going to get that good. And I think it's going to come to the point when if we're able to look into your brain when you're looking at the color red, and you're able to have that same machine looking at two different people who are looking at the color red, and it's projecting the same color red, there comes a point when actually we have that kind of transparency where the qualia is demystified as like a purely unidentifiable internal experience.
Zero?
I want to live in a world where we have full duplex, pipes to the brain.
I think some people will opt into that, but people that never opt into it will still be able to learn truths about qualia from experiments they want nothing to do with.
Well, my quick retort, by the way, to the transhumanist idea of us being connected to the machine is that I think
It's
that
a
there
Tesla
are
idea.
yes, Tesla idea is that there are certain qualities that I've been discovering through meditation that I think could unlock things that people have forgotten about. For example, during meditation, or rather even after meditation, when I'm lying in bed, I am able to have like closed eye visions of a three-dimensional object that's spinning, made out of tons of very small lights, and I can rearrange it however I want to. It looks kind of like a little tower. And to me,
Have
that
you ever
means,
read
yeah, yeah.
Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha by Daniel Ingram?
No, I'm gonna write it down right now. That sounds very interesting. But one other
You might.
interesting, yeah.
Well, so he outlines a sort of a program of different levels of attainment that you reach in meditation. I'm not sure what kind of system you're using, but
Breathing
he,
techniques,
he sort
Wim
of,
Hof method.
I see, interesting. Well, I'm curious how you would map your experiences onto his sort of hierarchy of jhanas, but that's probably a discussion for another time. Do I believe general... Oh, sorry, go ahead. Another question is, do I believe general AI is possible? Yes. But it may not look like you think, and it will be horrible.
So one more thing before I introduce Leonella, I just want to mention about that meditation for whatever inspiration it may serve to whoever is listening, that tower is made up in the center, like that area that people would define as the third eye. It is made up of a white DNA helix. So everything is spinning around this helix. And again, I don't really know what it means beyond that, but it's a very interesting realm to explore and see what could be built there over time. And the colors, by the way, it's like blue, purple, and like this reddish color as well. Like I hardly ever see the color black anymore when I close my eyes. But anyway, with that, I want to bring Leonella into discussion. Leonella is very much in the virtual reality space. I met her originally through NYVR, this not yearly, this. I don't even remember how often they had conferences back then. I think like every month or so. But it's just like all these people who are into virtual reality gathering together and having events. And we threw a VR event at the National Arts Club 2 times, and that was a lot of fun. So, Leonella, it's great to have you here, and I am very interested in your take on what the future of virtual reality in the next couple of decades is going to be, and I would love to bring Zero into that discussion as well, because Zero, you also wrote about virtual reality, so yeah, take it away, Leonella.
I hope that it doesn't sound like ambient sounds anymore in here.
Sounds great.
No, sounds great.
That was actually my purifier.
It's a good purifier, I bet.
I think my mic is just extremely sensitive. So I guess you guys were talking about consciousness. Were you talking about consciousness in terms of virtual reality?
Not yet. Not yet. Although maybe I think we were starting to get to how there could be links and bridges and contentions. I think Lev is very appropriately cautious about how certain types of merging with virtual reality could interfere with someone's internal experience and maybe ability to connect with higher planes or something.
Yeah. There's a place called VR Bar. Unfortunately, I think they're closing down because of the whole coronavirus. But it was actually the longest running VR arcade in New York, and one of their experiences was called ayahuasca, and it was a virtual reality experience of what it's like to go through an ayahuasca trip. And it was, I don't know, I've never actually tried ayahuasca, and I've never taken any hallucinogenics before, but it was intense, and so intense that you can't escape it, which is, I guess, what a trip would be like. And in terms of where virtual reality will be in the next 10 years. That'll what the people will be doing who are in the virtual reality industry, what methods that they're going to take in order to get to where we are. And they might do things that might actually hurt them, and they might not realize just because they're still experimenting. For example, there was a time when virtual reality became popular again, back in like 2007, and it was just 360 videos. It wasn't really full immersion where you can go deeper into the experience. It was just like an image that you can interact with in a 360 plane. And what was happening was people were getting nauseous from them. And so people have associated nausea with virtual reality. So every time they see a headset, they probably won't try it because they're already getting sick. So that happened, and of course nobody planned on that or wanted that, but it was part of the whole experience. So there's a lot that needs to be involved in what kind of experiences you make. You can't treat virtual reality experiences the same as you would be building any game. You can't build virtual reality experiences on a 2D environment because things like that end up happening. So you have to really think on a three-dimensional plane to be able to make real virtual reality experiences that are really encapsulating. In terms of consciousness, I don't think you'll like my answer on this, but my understanding of what consciousness is, based on what we know today, is that we are evolutionary beings of millions and millions of years, and we are made up of molecules and, well, bacteria, and then there's whatever is actually us, and we can't disregard all that bacteria that lives on us because it takes up a lot of who we are. So we can't just say that makes no influence as to what we are. And consciousness is my understanding of the cultivation of your microbiome, trying to make sure that you don't kill yourself. So it creates this consciousness that makes sure that when you're in the external world that they don't really have control over because they're so tiny, that they can make sure that you stay safe. So they create these motions to make sure that you're acting or behaving in a way that would be beneficial to them. So, because you know that a lot of the stuff that happens to you is based on the things that you eat. Your relationship with people is also dependent on whether you enjoy meals together, so you end up having similar microbiomes, and you become more, you can understand each other better and relate to each other better. So when it comes to technology and consciousness, what you're really doing is you're replicating whatever information you've collected on the person. It's not them truly. It's just a copy of them that is a separate entity, but it's not an actual consciousness. You can't actually download somebody's consciousness. You could just only make a copy of it, but it'll never be you, right? Because you still exist. And even if you were dead, that still wouldn't be you because those are not your atoms. That data was not made out of the same atoms that you were. So in order to make an artificial intelligence, you'd have to make it out of actual biological material, not something out of a computer, because the whole point of bacteria and atoms needing to be together. And bacteria is not an atom, it's an actual living being. So there's like millions and billions of living beings inside of you working together, trying to figure out how to make sure you don't fuck up so that they don't die.
Well, that's totally in line with integrated information theory and how consciousness is an emergent phenomenon. But yeah, I totally agree. You wouldn't be able to download your consciousness. That wouldn't be you. But have you seen they made a computer that operated on water? As in the switches and stuff are operated like water is what was actually doing the computation. And so if you scale stuff like that, like you'll be able to create wetware. And if you look at what's happening with nanotech, they already have nanobots that are the size of blood cells and things like that. So you're going to be, and like we're learning a lot with swarm technology, you're going to be able to do stuff that simply is not possible now. But to say that we're never going to create, I wholly believe that technology is emerging as the seventh kingdom of life, right? And I think that this is something that people are going to struggle with in the same way that they struggled with learning that the earth was not the center of the universe. As in, a lot of people like to think of themselves as separate from nature, when we're much more like, if we're separate from nature, we're as separate from nature as a surfer is from the ocean, right? As in, it's a very shaky separation, right? And it's really all one thing.
Let's get Zero's take on this.
Well, so computation can be the idea of a Turing machine is fully abstract, which is abstract. You can build emulators, that is to say, you can simulate one computer inside of another. Sorry, I didn't catch the name. Most recent edition. Thank you. Yes, but I think what Leonel is saying is that consciousness is not a computationally tractable problem. That there is something extra computational, perhaps inhering in biology. So it's an interesting thought. What if you built a computer out of water and then introduced a bunch of bacteria culture into it? I think you would jam up the mechanism, but sure, why not?
I think that the way that programming and the way computers work right now is just not the right method of creating AI, real, true AI, and replicating our own consciousness. We have to think of actual alternatives. One thing that brings to mind is how you said nanobots. Another good form of creating nanobots is with the use of parasites. You can reprogram parasites to go and kill cancer, for example. But how would you program a parasite? How would you create a program environment for organic matter to be sustained in?
Well, Zero wrote in the comments, my understanding of quantum mechanics is that atoms do not actually have identity. So I'm curious if you could expand on that, where you come from.
Well, what I mean by that is that there's no, this will sound ridiculous, but it's not as if you could take an atom and write your name on it in a Sharpie, okay, yes, silly metaphor, and then swap it with another one, and so that's the atom. Like, atoms, at a quantum level, particles just don't really work that way. There are quantum states, and they flow from one into another according to some really fiendishly complicated mathematics that I'm trying to wrap my head around, but it's not a case of like, oh, the atoms are, whatever your essence is, I guarantee you it does not reside in atoms. It may reside in a configuration of atoms, but it certainly doesn't reside in the atoms themselves. That is an extremely outside possibility. I would put brain as a transponder to the spirit world, significantly higher probability than that. But I was actually hoping we could return to the discussion of the virtual reality ayahuasca trip.
Yes.
I would like to know more about this. I also put a link in the comments that I really, really enjoy, regardless of how you choose, how much credibility you wish to assign to it, about a fellow who took a bunch of DMT trips and had a psychotic breakdown. One of the most interesting things about people who take DMT or ayahuasca, which is actually just DMT that is activated orally by being combined with a MAO inhibitor, as you probably know, is that they sort of see the same recurring cast of characters, like different people who take the drug see the same entity within some delta of the fact that all the people who report these stories are absolutely drug-addled out of their minds. But there's a common cast of characters, which I find really, really fascinating, and I'd love to know if any of these beings were used in the ayahuasca virtual reality sim.
The ayahuasca experience was, from what I remember, it was a lot of tunneling and snakes. There was a lot of like merging of patterns. Sometimes it would form like some kind of arches from some architecture, and then they would merge into animals. And it
Were
was
there
just
jeweled, self-driven basketballs, perhaps?
Fabergé eggs.
Yes, exactly.
it was very primitive. It was very just kind of like architectural and animalistic. It wasn't really anything that was in the modern time. This was based on another person's perspective, so you were as if you were them, and it was a tribe. I think maybe somewhere in some part of the world, and this person was dying, and he was given ayahuasca as like a final passing, so that he would, I guess, die in peace, or like, I don't know, like have a last trip. So the whole experience was this person dying but also tripping at the same time. And what he imagined would only be based on the things that he had seen, based on like where he lived. So no Fabergé eggs or basketballs.
Ah, too bad, too bad.
Well,
But interesting.
that experience sounds a lot like a dream state, while DMT, even though I would say that I've had many dreams that are very DMT-like, but it's a lot more common to approach things like a train station, like a forest, things that you resonate with in this world. People have described the DMT experience as being realer than reality itself, where the beings that they meet, they feel like they actually intrude upon whatever it is these beings were doing, and they're kind of like really surprised to see them, like, how did you get here? So I've always been fascinated by this. I want to actually bring in later on John Chavez. I just told him out of the blue right now to come onto the stream. He wrote a book called Questions for the Lion Tamer about producing endogenous DMT. So when I was talking about the breathing technique earlier on, his consensus is that we actually have DMT all through our body. And when we do these various breathing techniques or any other kind of like yogic practices, we can channel them and have these transcendent experiences that produce all this like purple color, and it would get pretty close, I think, if you give it several years to a DMT state. But I'm still in the starting point here, so we'll see what happens.
I hear if you go on a 10-day silent retreat, that 88% of people start hallucinating on the 4th day. And I think it's a DMT trip. But you've never done DMT, right?
No, I've never done DMT. The only thing that I have done
is... So you assume it's DMT-like. You assume it's DMT-like when you talk about your...
I assume from the experiences people are talking about when they go into the DMT portal. Like we had Patrick Mayer in our art stream, and he talked about his experience seeing a orange grid. And that was kind of like the tunnel he was going through. And the structure of the grid is also present, at least for me, within the DMT, within the psychedelic, self-induced psychedelic state, where you would have something in the center, like a light in the center. By the way, someone has their audio on. Please turn it off. So you would have a light in the center connected, and it's going to reconnect again, or rather it's attempting to reconnect. This is one of the problems that we keep dealing with on this stream over here. So it's going to reattempt to reconnect, and let's see what happens. I'm going to end the stream probably. Oh, here we go. We are back online. Yes, no need to end the stream. I can't believe this as far as the bitrate goes. I've lowered the bitrate to 1000. Apparently that's not enough, but we're still going to keep trekking through. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to have this on an outer server later on, so we're not going to have to deal with this bullshit ever again. So anyway, Zero, I don't know, like, what do you think about what I just said regarding this kind of like stage that people could see in this state of meditation, where there does seem to be a structure to it. There does seem to be a certain way these things work.
What about our new guest?
Yes,
I also, is
Leonella.
there a way
I would love for you to
and what
let me
about
know what you think
John?
too.
John
Oh, John is here.
John's right here, left.
Thank you so much. Here's the thing. I'm looking at the screen. I did not
What's
see
up?
John is here. So I'm going to put John into the screen right now. This is OBS here, so bear with me. I'm good at it. Here we go. So John wrote the amazing book before, Questions for the Lion Tamer. And Jules, I really appreciate you letting us know that John is here. So let's see. Here we go. John Chavez. Done. John, welcome to the Sewing Discourse stream. Thank you so much for coming at such short notice. You are an amazing dude and a great author and super info. So I'm curious what you think about the DMT experience that I was just talking about.
Sounds amazing, man. How often do you have those experiences for?
Well, anytime that I do a good breathing technique, that's when I usually have it. So this the center of my eye starts to pulsate when I lie down in bed, and as the pulsation keeps going, I get this tornado from the DNA helix in the center of all these little lights of blue and purple color, and it creates, like I was just saying earlier, this structure which looks kind of like a tower, like a dome with a little tower on top, and that just keeps spinning, and I could rearrange it however I want.
That's intriguing, man. I mean, there's the whole conversation in regards to whether reality is a projection of the mind or if the brain is just receiving an outer reality. I think it's a little bit more malleable than people are really aware of, especially when you get into concepts such as visualization and the fact that certain visualizations have been known to come to life. Like there's a lot of hypnosis studies showing that you can affect your physiology in a very tangible, measurable way via visualization. You can visualize your hand getting hot. You can visualize a fire in your hand, and they can measure it in an objective manner that your hand is actually getting hotter. And just like you can do the opposite, you can imagine your hand in a hypnotic state, and you go ahead and you're imagining it in a cold bucket of water, and your hand will get objectively cold. They'll measure that. So I guess what I'm getting at is that, yeah, reality is complicated. DMT, 5-MeO DMT, the endogenous monoamine oxidase inhibitors, they're all located in the brain. Leads me to believe that we're wired like this for a reason. I think that the human potential is very much untapped. I think you're tapping into some of that, and I think we're just here to kind of play and see how we can go ahead and crack the code, and I guess seeing how we can manifest the mind to benefit humanity.
Have you ever read The Brain That Changes Itself, John?
I have heard that title, but I haven't read it. No, who's the author?
Norman Doidge. So he actually wrote the preface to Jordan Peterson's book, which I was not very fond of at all. But basically, he was saying, like, stop giving. The preface was basically saying Jordan Peterson is not a boogeyman. Like, he thought that even though he has a very granular kind of scientific, like, spiritual perspective on the brain, he was saying, hear Jordan Peterson out. So that was the only reason why he wrote the preface to his book, 12 Rules for Life. But one of the chapters in Brain That Changes Itself talks about these. They had two groups of people. One, they had lifting, let's say it's 20-pound weights every day. And then the other group, they had them visualize lifting 20-pound weights every day. And the people that were doing the visualization had as much, if not more, muscle growth than the people who were actually lifting 20-pound weights. And it sounds very similar to what you were just talking about with the hot and cold.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think more experiments like this, more studies like this really push the boundaries of what we think is possible. I believe you've been in contact with Rupert Sheldrake, right?
Yeah, we had Rupert at the National Arts Club speaking about science and spiritual practices, and it was a very interesting talk.
Yeah, the whole concept of, I think his thing is morphogenetic field, is that it?
Yeah, it's called morphic fields, and I haven't really
studied... Morphic resonance?
Well, yeah, morphic resonance and morphic fields, that's part of his research. And I don't know, like he writes a lot about animals that can sense certain things before humans can. For example, a dog can sense when their owner is going to be home, when the owner is incredibly far away. And it reminds me
Yeah.
of something that an Aborigines tribe talked about, where when a hunting party went out, they were able to know in advance whether the hunt's been successful before they came back, and they pointed to their heart. They said that that's their telegraph. This was back during the days of the telegraph when this was documented. And it's very interesting to me, like we were talking about before, the potentials for human beings to unlock various processes that they have. And I notice also, by the way, just very quickly, I do notice that there is kind of like the Seraphim Rose persuasion that we were talking about before in our UFO podcast about aliens being demons, where I think that people are concerned about these various technologies, inner technologies, if you will, being used in the wrong way, to such an extent that they would not even want to consider trying them out themselves, even something like yoga or meditation. So I'm curious what your take is on that. And everybody's take, honestly.
Well, that was like two completely different things, and it was like two different conversations.
Went on to a new topic.
Well, the one thing I wanted to touch upon with Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance, and I guess the stuff that, some of the stuff that he refers to is that there's like an energetic imprint, regardless of the physical, or that it precedes the physical formation of something, right? Isn't that something that he discusses?
I think so, and again, I haven't read the book, so I can't really talk about it.
I only know Rupert Sheldrake's material from Giorgiani's book Prometheus and Atlas, and then from a talk he did at the National Arts Club.
Okay. Yeah, from what I understand, he believes that there's a field of energy that either correlates or is that the blueprint for physicality, everything physical in nature, and maybe even non-natural aspects of life. But I guess the reason why I would bring that up is because we were talking about visualizations affecting physiology. And one of the most interesting studies, multiple studies that I've seen, I think there's about 6 or 7 replication studies of it, is that, this has nothing to do with sexuality per se, but I guess in the 60s and 70s, you had hypnotherapists seeing if adult women could actually visualize their breasts growing and having any effect on their body. And they noticed that after 12 weeks of 1 hour of hypnosis per week, visualizing their breast growth, it actually grew in an objective manner. And this study has been replicated about 4 different researchers. So it's just interesting in the sense of, it seems as though our visualizations can create a blueprint in which the physical can follow that. And I think the potential for that is huge, especially when it comes to things like disease and reversing disease, or maybe even inducing spontaneous remission, something that Joe Dispenza has really been big on recently, and he's pushing the limits of that. So what do you guys think about that?
I think there's a potential for that. That's the kind of wishful thinking I like. But I do think that there's easier to grasp concepts of just morale and things like that. Like there was I want to be more indirect about this, so I'm not offensive, but basically I've seen people get sick, and I've seen different people handle sickness in different ways. And there have been times when I've seen like a group or a family respond to sickness in a way that I thought was like making it worse. And like they were not doing anything that could trigger placebo type reactions, or just and it was very difficult to see. In fact, it reminds me to something similar when there's this really disturbing documentary, unsettling documentary called An Open Secret about pedophilia in Hollywood. And I remember telling Lev what I thought about a family's reaction in the documentary. As in, there was this young person, molested or whatever, comes back home, tells his parents, and the parents' morale became so low. As in, like, they they started emitting emotions that then he mirrored in amplification. And it's just, I actually thought that and he ends up drinking himself to death into a coma and dies. And I thought, actually, as maybe horrifying as it might sound to some people, I actually thought they did as much, if not more, to kill him than the traumatizer, the original traumatizer.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a hard thing for people to work with.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely hear what you're saying, man. That makes a lot of sense. And people aren't really aware of, I guess, the emotions that they can project can really have an effect on somebody else's psyche, especially like a parent and a child relationship. Absolutely.
People underestimate how contagious their emotions are. And a lot of people don't accept how much they do condition people around them. Like, they almost want to be able to say, I'm autonomous, you're autonomous, I have free will, you have free will. Things that I do should not be affecting you X, Y, and Z. I am not conditioning you anyway if I don't mean to condition you anyway. Which the problem is that a lot of people, just because they don't have the self-awareness of themselves, are terrible or negative conditioners of people they care about, right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, some of the interesting studies in terms of brain resonance kind of coincides with what you're talking about right now. So basically, there's been studies with two groups of people, both with EEG on their brains, so reading the brain waves. And what happens is when two people have eye contact, their brainwaves start to sync up. When two people they touch hands, they shake hands, their brainwaves tend to sync up. When there's a lot of emotion involved, the brainwaves sync up even stronger. So what you're talking about between a child and a parent, and if the parent is pushing so much trauma from whatever happened, you're talking about the pedophilia stuff, then they can project their strong emotions and cause the kid.
Hello? I think John's camera just froze right now. John, can you hear us?
We'll circle back. He'll come back.
Well, Leonella, I'm curious about your thoughts on this.
Oh, hold on. No, he's back. He's back. You cut out for a moment, so we missed.
Okay. Am I back now?
Yes.
You're back.
Okay.
You were at the moment of talking about parents, like, impacting.
So I was talking about the brain synchronization studies, and basically if a parent were to have like a high level of emotional sort of distress in them, they can project that, so the kid actually starts to synchronize up with that, even though the kid doesn't have that. So the kid can just be, he maybe experienced some level of trauma, but if in the mind of the parent, the trauma is so much greater, they can project that on the kid. And that's actually, these are studies that have actually already been done in terms of brain synchronization, so.
And it's the same with morose. Like, they were very morose. Like, they were very depressed and disturbed and morose. And when this kid probably actually needed morale, like ways to like trigger post-traumatic growth as opposed to post-traumatic stress. But it's very interesting with the synchronization you're talking about, because I learned a lot about the mirror neurons and things like that, and I started thinking about when Lev introduced me to Rupert Sheldrake's concepts of morphic resonance, or the types of tethering potential that people could have, that they recently quantumly entangled biological cells. So Einstein did an experiment that demonstrated quantum entanglement. What they're able to do is entangle quantumly two atoms and then separate them. And they found that no matter the distance that these atoms were separated, if you did something to one of them, it would happen to the other. So I would suspect that if you were able to have tethering among people that become very close, not even necessarily family members, but like best friends, right, and things like that, like that you could become biologically quantumly entangled in ways that you can perceive subtle pangs that become very similar to like how a skillful navigator can like kind of detect the weather when they're sailing, right? They'll lick their finger and they'll just feel the wind on their finger, and that helps them decide how to navigate, right? Yeah. And I think that there are ways to open up that perception in people, that into psychics and all this kind of woo stuff, and they just become more and more delusional, right? And I think that can obscure some of this potential. If there is suppressed Prometheus and Atlas, he's saying that the military has knowledge about these realities. Like there's like a top general in charge of parapsychology. And you have militaries like with top secret programs, like working with dolphins, right? With certain elites. And I speculate that it's actually to create, to unstunt, to create super empaths, right? And there's something in the brain that might be the key ring or to the antenna for anomalous information, and it's the caudate putamen, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But I think that there is potential there, as in we might have our own type of sonar that also might not be limited by distance, depending on who and how tethered you are, who you're tethered to and how tethered you are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you look at the SRI stuff, you look at the Paralab stuff, there's a lot out there. I mean, even if some people take the Monroe Institute stuff seriously, some don't, but I think longevity and people having direct experience is key. I think there's definitely a sixth sense, things of that nature. I don't know how far it can go. I mean, theoretically it can go really far, but you know, we're not living in a society that necessarily nurtures that openly in a public manner. So, you know, a lot of people that even have these abilities, I know people that have had these abilities that try to shut them off because, you know, they can't really explain it well to other people in a scientific sense. So people just look at them like they're crazy. And that makes it a little bit difficult, right? So, but I think we're entering a pretty new era. I think the endogenous DMT conversation and 5-MeO DMT conversation really opens it up because I think it allows people to ask these questions of why do we have these psychedelic compounds in the brain, and why, when a lot of people take psychedelics, they tend to talk about feeling as though, not necessarily having the proof, but feeling as though they know what each other are thinking. I mean, I've had so many engineers in Silicon Valley email me based on stuff that I've written, saying that they could have sworn that they had telepathy during LSD or a mushroom trip with their friends. So, yeah, there's something there, and we're definitely in an interesting era.
And you were also talking about the connection between the brain waves going into the gamma state and monks that meditate and people who have various psychedelic experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting because from what I've seen, there's like 8 studies indicating that the psychedelic experience is changing the brainwaves drastically, and most of it's taking in a faster oscillation compared to our normal baseline waking state. You know, one of the things I was thinking about is that, you know, it would be one of the biggest riddles of the world if you were having these mystical experiences with no change in your brainwave state from baseline. I mean, that would be what I would consider an impossibility in terms of deciphering any mechanisms for it. But there are significant changes in the brainwaves during psychedelics. There are significant brainwave changes during hypnosis, meditation, lucid dreaming, sensory deprivation, all that. And there seems to be a lot of overlap. in terms of the gamma wave. So, we have the 5 brain waves going from delta, theta, alpha, beta to gamma, and even higher gamma if you want to go there. But it seems as though the brain waves tend to correlate with our ability to process information. And for some reason, whatever reason, during these states that are considered hallucinatory, we're processing information at a much faster speed than our normal waking baseline.
And there's also a connection between going into lower states like delta, and I'm not sure what the lowest state is, but it's almost like a calm before the storm thing, right?
Exactly. It almost seems like a bounce or a coupling. I mean, like a neurophysiologist or a neuroscientist would say that there's a coupling. So they say that there's like a theta that's going slow, and then the gamma is coupling with it. So they're kind of moving in unison. From my perspective, it's almost like a rubber band. You pull it back, and then you let it snap, and that's where you can get that gamma oscillation to have your insights. I mean, even things like aha moments, like moments of insight. They've been observed to correlate with moments of relaxation and then a real quick blip spike of gamma, and that's the moment of insight. And that's why guys like Nikola Tesla or even Thomas Edison, he was one of the most famous people to induce hypnagogia, right? In the sense of where he would put himself in a relaxed state. He'd have 2 really heavy metal balls, almost like shot puts, in his hands, and he would be in a rocking chair. And he would utilize that technique whenever there was a problem that he couldn't solve with his conscious mind. He would try to go into this hypnagogic state in where he would focus on the problem. And then when he got so relaxed that he actually fell asleep, he would drop the balls, they would make a loud thud, and then boom, he would have his moment of insight. That's what he felt worked for him. And, things like this are not really well known in the public, but, altered states can really provide some opportunities to delve into ideas that we normally don't have during our normal waking intellectual state.
And I wonder, with the tethering, if there could be circumstances when you have people that are, like, don't even want to be tethered, right? That become tethered, right? To people that spend a lot of time with them, right? Like, have a lot of eye contact. Like, you could, like, and also you could have it stunted in you, and it could potentially be on in someone else, right? Yeah. So while you think you have some emotional distance when you don't necessarily have that kind of emotional distance at all. Or it might be one-sided, as in because you want emotional distance, you actually shut it off in yourself, but it doesn't mean you shut it off in the person that's potentially tethered to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've even seen that in a physical aspect where, some people are, there's the emotional aspect of tethering, but I've seen like people that are quote unquote healers, and they do whatever, their visualization healing magic on somebody, and they tend to feel if they're doing work on somebody and they're having the patient is having stomach problems, the healer starts to have stomach problems as well, or physical sensations in that same region. So I think that, yeah, there's a really interesting concept of tethering and unwanted tethering for sure.
Or having psychic vampires. People who that's kind of how I think some old people at church are when they want there to be like younger people who go to church with them. They're just sucking off their energy the whole time. Just getting the whole family together. But at the same time though, I think that there is a lot of noise rather than signal that people are focusing on today. And one of the keys of meditation is to be able to get into that very relaxed state so there could be a moment of clarity. And the problem we were talking about before that I was addressing to Jules's talk about the potential for merging with machines is that if we have all this stuff that's just doing shit for us all the time, like the Wall-E people, then how much are we able to exercise our own willpower?
Yeah, that's a big issue, right? Especially if we start to develop technology that like legitimately allows somebody to do telepathy, because once that gets broken down and implemented in society, then we will never really understand that we have this innate ability endogenously, naturally. we will always think that we needed an artificial sort of implant to go ahead and do these things. So, it's a tough time to be in, man. I almost feel like there's a little bit of a race going on. That if the masses aren't aware that, yeah, I don't think telepathy is a very easy thing to replicate. I think that it takes skill. And I've talked to neuroscientists, and they're skeptical of it, but I tell them it's skill based. Absolutely, it is. And
It would be like The Shining or something. It would be kind of like The Shining.
in what regards?
As in, well, The Shining, I think it would be kind of absurd, but that you don't get telepathy. Like, if you do a Neuralink like Elon Musk, you might have the kind of telepathy where you could have a conversation without talking. As opposed to, like, a pang that Lev is describing where, oh, I guess the hunt didn't go so well because everyone's in a bad mood. Now I kind of feel in a bad mood, right? Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I would imagine it's if people have the potential for quantum entanglement to be biologically quantum entangled and that to be a form of telepathy, it would be much more ineffable. It would be much more instinct-based, much more kind of like The Shining. Although in The Shining, they're showing you like images and you're seeing visions, and that's not what I think it would be. But
Well, that's another question, by the way, about the power of the brain that we were bringing up when we had the great Donna Tremplova, a.k.a. Donatella, on, where I don't know what the limitation is for us to perceive, like, with closed eyes, something more than just some weird tunnel or just some light spinning around. Like, I'd be very curious how complicated it could actually get without the aid of any psychedelics.
Like, are you talking about in terms of just meditation or telepathy specifically?
Well, in terms of being able to, either through meditation or through, I don't know, whatever, being able to see while your eyes are closed very clearly. And in fact, there was one experience I remember. There was this kid who's a friend of the family who came over for dinner. Like, the whole family came over, and he was sitting in my room, and I gave him the Mindfold Tryout, the one that Alex Gray invented. And when he put it on, he was able to describe in detail just certain things that were around the room. And that, to me, like, either he had a really good memory, and he could just remember everything before he put this thing on, but I wonder, like, especially with kids, how much these certain faculties have not deteriorated yet, and what that says about what we're able to experience.
Yeah, I mean, the kid thing is that's it's a conversation that's very different than adults, because I feel like kids come into this thing not knowing that they're not supposed to be able to do this. So I feel like there's a lot of strange things in regards to, kids, especially with their brainwaves. I mean, if you look at the brainwaves of children, it's almost like they're always in what would be the equivalent of a meditated hypnotic state for an adult. So for them to walk around and be able to process this information and have these abilities without even trying, I mean, imagine if stuff like that was cultivated. I have a friend, Edith Chan. She's a Chinese medicine doctor, and
I know Edith.
Yeah, she's great, man, and she has put me on, I guess, to even be aware that there are schools out there that actually focus on teaching children to nurture these capabilities. And from the videos I've seen, it looks pretty solid,
The X-Men. They're building the X-Men.
I hope so.
Well, Leonella, speaking of the X-Men, do you see any potential in what we're talking about here regarding these certain abilities being awakened in children, and how that may contrast to a future that transhumanists have of merging with machines? Oh, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. I think humans are very good at adapting. I think that there's a lot of potential for them. We, I guess, are built for taking on anything, whether it's natural or something that we've created. I think that when it comes to merging with machines. I see potential for becoming a cyborg and just replacing yourself with 3D printed parts and nanobots, reprogramming your DNA. Right now, that's impossible because you can't make mutations on such a massive scale. You can't have the X-Men as of right now. It's just mutations happen in your body all the time, but not to the point where you are turning into like someone with superpowers that can fly or shoot fire. I mean, like your body is not handled to take that on. But with enhancements in technology and cybernetics, you can adjust to that. I mean, there's a lot of things in X-Men that just are physically impossible. They probably are possible if you can go on another planet. But, like, for example, the Flash, like, he's so strong. If he really is a human being, going that fast would rip the skin off his bones. So, things like that are not possible as a human being. So portraying them as humans is very interesting.
Like watching Iron Man do those dead stops in midair and then like going like in a different direction, like his body would explode in the suit.
Yeah.
Right? Like
any impact in a suit is impossible. You need so much impact compression that would need to be absorbed somehow, and I have no idea how that would be fathomable. I mean, of course, like right now it's not, but that's what you would need in order for that to happen. You can't just put on a metal suit and then take a bunch of blows. It doesn't make you any more powerful. You're just still a vulnerable human being in metal.
By the way, I am noticing your Russian accent, which for some reason like I kept in the back of my mind, but now I do notice there being a Russian accent when you speak. I wonder if I also sound like, do I sound Russian?
I don't hear it, so no.
Okay. Well, I mean more in terms of like self-guided mutation, where if we were talking about these kids who have these certain abilities and they're allowed to cultivate those abilities as opposed to forgetting about them when they become adults, that would be in a way like self-guiding into a transcendence beyond being, controlled by whatever advertisements are out there, by whatever things want your attention and want to give you money. It seems like there is freedom when you start engaging in these various exercises, that you start looking at the world differently and you stop being that much of a consumer. You have a different value judgment, I think, like the more you start paying attention to the things that really matter. I'm not saying that's the only way, but I don't know, like I'm curious what you guys think. Would that also lead to a different moral revolution, for lack of a better term?
I don't know about a moral revolution at all. I think that's kind of way out of my scope or our scope, but maybe I can understand that more with explanation. But I think the way you would cultivate some of these potential in kids is in culturally unintuitive ways right now. As in, to not stunt kids, it's almost like you need more unpredictability, you need more Kanye Wests, you need more people that have strong egos without being egotists. You need, because there's kind of a common trend or an instinct for people to kind of have a reversion to certain types of beaming. Like if someone's beaming all the time and glowing all the time, like it can rub people the wrong way as well. So not to say that you need people to be Kanye West and you need people with strong egos, but you need people to be more tolerant of people that glow and that beam. And it's very hard when you have a lot of people weighing their happiness in relation to others. When you have people that unconsciously and subconsciously just do little things to hold each other down. right? And when you have a lot of demure people doing things to kind of hold people down, through aggregation, what you're doing is stunting people around you, right? And I think that then directly, indirectly can like shut off some of their inner potential, right? And you're not even aware of how that connection works.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I just think that physical exercises would also help in that regard too. It would just help have a different perspective on what's going on. I don't know, like I'm very curious about your experience, John, after doing meditation, taking psychedelics and all that. Is there like a before John and an after John?
Yeah, I mean, I actually had like this thing called I don't know, some people call it Kundalini awakening or spiritual awakening in 2013. That was really what led me down my path. It wasn't psychedelics that really did it for me. There's not to knock psychedelics at all. I'm just talking about myself personally. And absolutely, it changed my perspective of what happiness is, what contentment is, changed my consumption rate of goods, right? I mean, I think that's where you can see a really profound change in society if a lot of these abilities come up. What's interesting is that I find that, if people were to cultivate this from a young age or even not at a young age, just once somebody starts to engage themselves in practices like meditation, breath work, mindfulness, that they become less consumption based for their sort of their happiness, right? They find that maybe just enjoying a view and taking a few deep breaths can bring about just as much pleasure as eating at a five-star restaurant and things of that nature. So the goals change. The things that you look forward to change completely. You don't value the same things, and that's really where I think us as a society need to change is in what we value. And it's difficult, right? Because you're still going to have half of the people not doing meditation, not doing these mindful exercises, and if they're the ones who are more predominant in the media circles and things of that nature, then they're going to be putting out certain images of what is still desirable. And then you're going to have the other half that are, slowly starting to cultivate themselves and realize maybe they don't need that stuff. So you're still going to have a divided society somehow. But I think little by little, people start to experience pure bliss, pure happiness without necessarily having to buy something or attain something material. Then it'll change their perspective forever. I think it changes you forever.
As a quick aside, by the way, I don't know if we have any fans of Xavier Renegade Angel either in this stream or in the chat. It's an amazing show. I highly recommend you watch it. And it talks about a lot of the similar stuff in a very, I think, very profound way. But someone on Twitter, I remember, wrote about psychedelics. They said that, like, the hippies who used to do psychedelics, like, now they're microdosing these psychedelics, and instead of using it to create projects for world peace, they're using it to create like better ad technology and better ways that weapons can fire, part of the military industrial complex, which like I don't know how many of the hippies ended up going into those positions of power, but it is interesting for me to think about psychedelics and all this flower power, stuff not being just one-sided as these very nice people who just want world peace. I think it's a technology. It's like a sword or a cannon or whatever, like you can misuse a lot of this stuff. And what I would love, by the way, and we're probably going to be wrapping up right now, but I would love for you to take part, John, for Sunday's stream. We're going to have Graventus on, and he's the guy who talks a lot about Seraphim Rose and his take on the hippie movement and psychedelics, coming from an Orthodox Christian perspective, where I think it's a very interesting thing to discuss something like bliss, something that, according to him, has also certain negative ramifications. So it would be very interesting if you could take part in that. And I don't know what happened to Leonella. I am seeing a Skype icon over here, so I don't know what her status is. She may actually not be in the stream anymore. I think she may have dropped out. But I think this may be a good time to end it. Here we go. Leonella's back. Thank you, Leonella. So let's get our final thoughts on the day. And again, a very big thanks for Zero HP Lovecraft for coming today. I am very grateful for him for doing this last minute, and we had a really fun stream. I enjoyed myself very much. I enjoyed the back and forth that Jules had with Zero. I thought that was a lot of fun. John, check it out later on when you watch the video. And yeah, let's go. Final thoughts. Jules, let's start with you.
Hey, I love doing this stuff, but I don't want to have a long wrap up. So thanks everyone for joining us and for just talking about this amazing stuff. I want to continue the conversations. I don't want it to end here.
And you guys have to go on Patreon right now. For the 12 people who are watching, go on Patreon, patreon.com/loveandjules, and support us. We are the greatest, most underrated podcast/video series in history. And
we will start bulking up in proportion, like physically.
Exactly.
We will get bigger in proportion to our Patreon.
Yeah, you're going to help us buy protein powder. So, Leonella, final thoughts for the evening.
I really enjoyed that you guys talked about virtual reality and consciousness and drugs. I think there's definitely so much more to say there. Usually we have these chats until like 12 a.m. I just want to see more of this later on. I think that there's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Lev made it sound like you guys would be getting us protein powder. Like, you might be getting Lev protein powder, okay? But I've gone all in on this, and Lev has not funded me. As much as I've asked him, I've been like, are you going to put money into this? Like, are you going to fund this? Because, like, what the heck are we doing? Like, this is intense over here.
No,
so, you'd be buying Lev protein powder, and you'd be also genuinely sustaining the show. So, we're bringing it.
Yes, we are. Patreon.com/loveandjules. Another slide out. So, John, you got in here last minute when the DMT conversation came up. I just texted you really quickly and asked if you could come on, and you did come on. So I'm very grateful for you coming on. Any final thoughts? You're going to end there.
Yeah, one quick thing, man. When you did mention how microdosing is being utilized to, I guess, optimize things like consumerism or even military aspects, I'd never even thought about that before in terms of maybe that you can bypass, I guess, the whole spiritual aspect of psychedelics. If you don't have an ego death and you only do microdosing, you can use it to optimize whatever kind of pathways that you already have, whatever motive that you have. It doesn't necessarily have to be for the greater good, but yeah, that's a really interesting conversation that we're going to have to continue at some point, man. So thanks for having me on.
Anytime.
Thanks, John.
Guys,
this was awesome.
Thank you so much, everybody.
We got to do our own. We got to do our own sewing discourse. This is the only sewing discourse you've ever done with the like after show. You did like that, right? This is typically the stream, and so we have all our brands, but we got to do it. We got to do a solo. We got to do a solo sewing discourse. I'd love that.
Definitely.
Anytime, man. Anytime.
Thank you.
All right, guys, take care, and don't forget, this coming Sunday, we are going to have a What Grinds My Gears / airing of grievances stream, where people are going to come on and talk about certain things that happened within the week. I mean, this has been a really big week. I mean, we all know the things that have been going on. So I think that's going to be talked about. Animation's going to be talked about as well. I'm going to have my friend Rob Yulfo coming on from the Rubber Onion podcast, and that's going to be a lot of fun, as well as Gravantas, who also wants to talk about animation, and I think we're going to have a little bit of psychedelics talk in there as well. John would love you to come in as well. Leonella, please come if you are able to.